We've got a golden rule. Mind your own damn business.
At the U.S. Democratic Convention last night, Tim Walz focused much of his speech on the theme of freedom and democracy and reproductive rights. Tonight, on the final day of the DNC, Kamala Harris will accept the Democratic Party's nomination for president. She found herself at the top of that ticket after Joe Biden withdrew from the race about a month ago. We're going to go straight to the United Center. That's where we're going to find Chuck Todd. He's the chief political analyst for NBC News and former moderator of its Sunday flagship, Meet the Press. Chuck, thanks so much for taking the time to speak with us here on CBC News Network. You know, so far at the DNC, we've seen one overarching message, one of unity. They're rallying around Harris in Chicago. Talk to us about what you wrote recently, whether this messaging is actually showcasing unity or highlighting a weakness in the candidate that she requires this type of rallying.
Well, look, I mean, we're going to find out in November, right? What's the right answer there? But you do have, look, this is a party that is organized around stopping Donald Trump. Hard stop, right? We've actually seen it now 2 elections in a row. Joe Biden essentially was handed the nomination in 2020. In many ways, the establishment rallied around him quickly as soon as he won his first primary because they didn't want to see Bernie Sanders end up winning the nomination, fearing that he couldn't beat Donald Trump. And then here we fast forward 4 years and, you know, what the party giveth, they can taketh away. And in many ways, the switch has been about, Democrats have sort of taken the switch as if it's like thirsty people being handed water, right? You've seen there was clearly a group of Democrats who just were not excited about Joe Biden. They were not interested in this election. And the mere fact of just switching out the candidates and putting a fresher face, a younger face, has certainly energized the party. But it's sort of everybody's putting what they believe onto Kamala Harris, right? She is not, everybody is in this arena, I think, just wants to believe this is going to work. And I think she's being very careful not to do too many details. She doesn't want to create factional divides inside the party. She's been careful with that, and I think you're going to see a lot more of that tonight from her.
Even though, Chuck, she's been careful about that, some of the criticism has been she hasn't focused very much on policy. And as you say, it could be to prevent those further divisions. But one major issue that we're still seeing be a divisive factor, and we're seeing it inside the convention center there at the United Center, where you are, I should say, is the war on Gaza and America's support, military support for the state of Israel, with more than 40,000 Palestinians killed. Some in the party want to see Harris do more than Joe Biden. They're very vocal. They live in swing states like Michigan. They're in Chicago, and they're not impressed this week, Chuck.
They're not, but they're not here in big numbers. I mean, I think what they said they were going to be able to do, they've not delivered. I think these protests have largely actually not really penetrated the arena itself. You've seen it more. There's certainly been some organized protests on the outside. But I'll be honest with you. I think if this had been Joe Biden's convention, I think these Gaza protests would be 3 times as large. I think you saw a little bit of the air come out of the protest balloon after the candidate switchover, and you could see it. There have been photographs of unused placards. You know, there was a lot of money put in to these protests to try to make them more influential than they really have been. Look, maybe something changes tonight, but you could feel this party was determined not to allow the protests get into this arena very well. And to the point of there are sort of minders for certain state delegations, Michigan and Minnesota in particular, who both had some large uncommitted delegates down there who voted uncommitted simply to protest the war in Gaza. And they've been, I don't know how else to put it, behaved, I guess is the way to call it. There hasn't been, there was 1 or 2 attempts on Monday night when President Biden spoke, but they've largely been a non-factor. And I think that we'll see if once college campuses come back, if that changes. But I think this is the dog that didn't bite.
Do you think that has to do with the fact they're perhaps giving Harris that leeway? She has been much more vocal about calling for a ceasefire. We heard that initial comment from her before perhaps Joe Biden made those comments. So even though it's DNC week, maybe they're giving her an opportunity. Is that why you think it's sort of subdued this reaction?
I think you have a lot of, this goes back to every faction of the party here is believing Harris is with them. It reminds me a lot of 2008 and Barack Obama. Barack Obama was more than happy to let red state Democrats think he was a bit more centrist and let blue state Democrats believe he was a bit more progressive. And I think that's the strategy here by Harris. Look, she's both been a little bit tougher on Netanyahu than Biden was. And at the same time, when she did have a rally interrupted by a protester, she was pretty direct about it and put it in these terms. If you want to help elect Donald Trump, if you think Donald Trump is better, keep doing what you're doing. And I think that resonated with some Democrats who were sympathetic to the protesters. And I think that had a lot to do with why these protests are much smaller here now that Kamala Harris is leading the party versus Joe Biden. I do believe these would be a much bigger deal and a much bigger story if this were still Joe Biden's party.
Let's talk about tonight. Harris set to give the biggest speech of her political career, even though she's been in the public eye for quite some time in various positions. Yeah. In some ways, she's really reintroducing herself to the American people. What are you expecting to hear, and what does the undecided portion of the electorate need to hear?
Well, I don't know if there's going to be, one thing I always like to warn people about is these political conventions are largely being watched by those that already support that party. And so not a lot of swing voters tune in for the entire thing, but some do. But what's more important is sort of what the takeaways are, if you will. I do not expect a lot of substance tonight. I expect her to spend a lot more time about her professional biography, to talk about her time as a prosecutor. They want to now lean in that she's tougher, that she was tough on crime. I think you're going to hear her tell a few stories on that. They got rid of abolishing the death penalty in their platform. They did it pretty quietly, but they also want to make sure swing voters hear that too. They're trying to they've leaned into getting tougher with border security at this convention over the last 2 days. And I think she wants to tie her time as Attorney General in California with what she did there. So I do think she's going to tell the stories of her previous stops in public life in San Francisco, in the state of California, and then also in the U.S. Senate. I don't expect a State of the Union type speech where she's saying, and I'm going to pass health care by the end of my first term, things like that. That instead, she's going to say, look, I share your values, and I'm going to look out for the middle class, and we're going to cut taxes without saying how she's going to do it. And look, I think she does at some point need to put meat on the bones, but tonight's speech isn't the night to do that.
We have heard quite a bit at the DNC about freedom. We're seeing USA signs and we're hearing USA chants. Patriotism definitely playing a role here. Some would argue that's not the usual play for Dems. That's something that we see Republicans do. How interesting has that been for you to watch in the last 3 days?
Well, it's actually been over the last year. There's a lot of Democrats that have been trying to sort of take a few words away from the Republicans, freedom being the big one. And using the overturning of Roe v. Wade and reproductive rights as a way in on that. But freedom also talks about book bans, that have happened in some of these states. So that the Democrats think if they can reclaim the freedom word, if you will, and sort of being able to say, hey, we're the ones that don't want government telling you what to do in your bedroom. We're the ones that doesn't want government telling you what you can read in your libraries. They're hoping that catches on, at least with, look, it's a small group of swing voters, but they're going to decide this election. And I think the Harris campaign believes that a messaging that is about sort of a lighter touch on government for those final swing voters who are, a lot of them are former Republicans, right? They believe in less government, if you will. I think they think it's an opening there, but that is, I think, the intent of that messaging.
When the Obamas spoke on Tuesday night, there were some digs against the Republican presidential nominee, Donald Trump, perhaps in ways that we didn't hear, particularly from Michelle Obama. I guess some people are wondering today, when Harris takes to the stage, and as you said, she's going to paint her own life picture, do you think that she could potentially take some further digs at Donald Trump?
Well, they have it, but it's a real change in tone. Joe Biden was painting Donald Trump as this dark, menacing figure who was about to destroy the democracy. You must be afraid of this person. it's been fascinating to watch in the 4 weeks that Harris has taken over as leader of the party. The tone on dealing with Trump has changed. They're not saying that if you give him power, he isn't capable of doing harmful things, but there's more of a mocking nature to it. They're almost treating him as if he's an aging Vegas show act that needs cancellation, right? That, just turn the page from this era. It's old ideas. He's been around 9 years now, and it's a different type of way they're trying to paint Trump, rather than this sort of dark, and they're trying to have a almost more joyful digs, right? That's why you saw them almost trying to get laughs at Trump's expense versus trying to make him this menacing threat. It's fascinating to me, but it looks like that tone is working better than how the Biden team was trying to take Trump on.
Perhaps it took 9 years to figure it out. Thanks for this, Chuck. I know you're so busy. I know it's jam-packed at the DNC. We really appreciate you talking to CBC News Network. Chuck Todd, the chief political analyst for NBC News, joining us from Chicago. Thanks so much, Chuck.